Roll call.
Connie Coleman-Lackady.
Present.
Don Daniels is excused. James Guerrero. Here. Nancy Hudson-Eccles.
Present.
Ryan Pearson.
Here.
Paul Wegman is excused. Christopher Weber.
Here.
5 commissioners present. You have quorum.
Thank you. Agenda updates. Oh, no, I'm sorry, excuse me. Approval of minutes from September 18, 2019. Has everybody read the minutes from last meeting? Do I have a motion?
Make a motion, we adopt the minutes.
I second.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Public comments. Anybody for public comments? Also, do we have any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair, we would ask that you would move the public hearing scheduled under number 7 to prior to the unfinished business on your agenda.
Thank you. Any further adjustments to the agenda?
No.
Planning commissioners? Okay. All right, seeing no one coming forward for public comments, I'll go to the next item on the agenda, which would be the public hearing.
And
Ms.
quickly,
Spear.
thank you, Madam Chair. To introduce this really quickly, this is the public hearing this evening for setting the docket for the 2020 zoning map and comprehensive plan amendments. This is not the substantive review period, but this is the point in time where the Planning Commission looks at the list of potential comprehensive plan amendments and then sends a recommendation to the City Council about that list. The City Council may change it, may adopt it as you recommend it, and then once that's done, then the Community and Economic Development Department starts its review, and then we'll come back to you next spring with the actual staff report about each one of these amendments that's been applied for. So this is a general and tentative schedule, but we're here tonight for the hearing, as I mentioned. Next time, October 16th, you're scheduled to take action on the docket recommendation, and then starting on November 25th, the council will begin looking at the docket as well. Assuming that moves forward by the end of the year, beginning next year, early next year, staff will conduct the review of all the items on that docket, and by next June approximately, it will be back in front of you for review. So we mentioned some of this last time, but there is one comprehensive plan text amendment, one privately initiated map zoning amendment, and then 6 other city-initiated map amendments. The text amendment relates to how high of density can be allowed within a planned development district in the residential estate and single-family residential land use designations. This is simply to bring the comprehensive plan language to match what's already in the city code. Then you'll see a map here that shows you where each of the 6 applied for, or 7, excuse me, zoning map amendments have been proposed. So they're roughly down the middle of the city this time. The first one is 3 parcels. This is the privately initiated amendment that's on the corner of Custer and Bridgeport, changing it from mixed residential to multifamily, and from mixed residential 2 zone to multifamily 2 zone. The second one is, in fact, a city-initiated one directly to the south of those 3 parcels under the first application, and this is a correction to a past error on the land use designation map. It should have been changed from neighborhood business district to multifamily already, but that was for some reason not done, so it would just be to correct that error. Then there is an 8-parcel amendment from corridor commercial to multifamily and commercial 1 zone to multifamily 3 zone along 111th and about Bridgeport Way. Then there's a larger 22-parcel application from the city, changing several rows of properties from neighborhood business district to high-density multifamily to bring it into consistency with surrounding properties. The zone would change from neighborhood commercial 2 to multifamily 1. That's these are excerpts out of the designation map and the zoning map just to show the various other types of zones and designations around these properties. The next application is the largest. This is the Springbrook area, and this is continuing the discussion about the Springbrook area that was in last year's map amendment docket, where the city had to go back and redo the flood map in this area. And if you'll recall, this is one that was put on hold for that process to occur. What's happening is this fall, the city council now has had a study session about this issue, but they are still awaiting the final analysis coming from the consultants that are working on this issue about whether or not the flooding hazard is actually higher or lower than what the current maps say from FEMA. But these are the maps coming specifically about the rezone. This was a request that the council put together originally to rezone a number of properties to industrial. This is from the study session that happened a couple of weeks ago at council. So this is the effective map that's in place, and it's based on 2009 data. And so it is a little bit older technology when they did the analysis. But long story short, the blue property, which you'll see is roughly that shape of the area in question in Springbrook, but it crosses I-5 and comes up almost to City Hall, actually. And then the orange there is the 500-year floodplain, which actually includes part of I-5 and then moves across and also into the city. This has been updated now, and this is the new version of that same mapping with 2019 technology. So now you see the 100-year flood areas, which are the ones that would be more likely to flood. A 100-year flood, long story short, happens more often than a 500-year flood. It's a term of art, if you will, but 100 happens more often than 500. And you'll see, though, that there are more areas that are affected under this new mapping process on both the 100 and the 500-year levels. So now what's occurring is the Public Works Department is getting the final information from the consultant they hired, and then they're going to be talking to FEMA as well as to Sound Transit, to WashDOT, and to Pierce County, because there's properties from all of those other entities as well affected by this new mapping, to see how they all may want to work to resolve this issue. So the flooding issue and where it will ultimately affect the FEMA maps is still up in the air. It may be resolved to some extent by the end of 2019, but as of right now, we're still in a waiting pattern, but there is this new data available I wanted to provide you. So as we move forward with the docket, I would suggest as a staff person that this be incorporated into the packet that goes forward to council, and then they can decide if they want to take it back out based on what they hear from the consultant and from staff by the end of the year when they're looking at this. Then we have a one parcel rezone being requested by the city that is neighborhood business district to mixed residential and neighborhood commercial zone to mixed residential zone. Then there is the Lakewood Station itself. So there's a couple of weird shaped parcels where the Lakewood Station is located. Probably the easiest way to see it is that top left map on this screen, where you see the building on the main larger parcel, and then there's a little bit of it that extends into the next one. And the idea here is to simply take the building itself and move it from corridor commercial zoning to public institutional zoning, since that it is a public institutional building. So that's just to make a correction for that single building rather than the rest of the area around it. And that's it. So other than that, we're ready for a public hearing on the 2020 comp plan amendment docket.
Thank you, Ms. Beer.
So I'm the architect of record for one of the map amendments, and I need to recuse myself from that. Is that something I would address now?
Yes.
Ms. Beer?
Yes,
So-
thank you.
So should I leave the DS now?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Guerrero. Sorry.
So do you have to put on headphones too so you don't hear? Okay, so we did have one person sign up for the proposed 2020 comprehensive plan amendment, Mr. Glenn Spieth.
Glenn Spieth, Lakewood. Due to the vast number of things that seem to be on the agenda tonight, I may have signed up for the wrong one. What I was interested in talking about is the Lakewood Development Code update. specifically about the comments that I made to the committee, and also the responses back, which I don't quite understand. But I'll give you a rundown of that. I've had a state license in
So you're
Lakewood.
speaking to Lakewood Municipal and Development Code?
Yes. There's a comment in there about what I had commented about, I guess at the last meeting or the meeting before.
Okay. Could I first ask if anybody wants to speak to the public hearing?
No, well, that's fine. Wherever you think I fit. I could go public comment?
You can stay right there until, so do we have anybody that's going to speak to the proposed 2020 comprehensive plan amendments? Anybody that's interested in speaking to the proposed 2020 comprehensive plan amendments? Seeing none, go ahead, Mr. Spieth.
Okay, Glenn Spaeth, Lakewood. I've had a state business license since 1968 within Lakewood. In 1977, I moved to my existing place on Stilican Boulevard, which was in the middle of 9 to 11 antique shops within about a 2 or 3 block area. I went to the county and said, I want to rezone so I can run a business there. They said, we don't have that in our plans for 20 years, but you can go ahead and file the paperwork and pay this big fee, and it'll be considered, but you'll have a 99.9% chance that you're going to be denied. I kind of gave up. Anyway, I opened my antique shop, got a county license in '78. They came out to shut me down because I didn't have a county license. I'd had a state license, I'd had the state business license. How many licenses do you have to have? Anyway, so I had county license from '78 to '96. I've had the city license from '96 to present. It runs me $150 a year for my business license, where most businesses in the city, it's like 65. That's what Mr. Bureau had told me in when we were discussing the business license fees. And he says, your fee is only $65. Well, never happened. Anyway, I've been zoned NC2 ever since we became a city. Shortly after we became a city, they tried to switch my zoning back and forth, back and forth. They wanted multifamily, they wanted duplex, triplex, they wanted, I don't know how many different times they changed it, but that's how I got involved in the planning advisory board way back then. I sat on the planning advisory board from 2000, after the comprehensive plan was done, until 2005, 5 years. The state now, on my business license through the state, says I don't sell enough per year to have a resale permit. I sold last year over 4,000, which isn't a big number, but I can't buy anything for resale anymore. Estate sales, even eBay. eBay charges you Washington State sales tax on what you buy, plus the amount you spend for shipping. There are things that I've spent $250 to get shipped, you know, big pieces of radio gear and that kind of thing. But, you know, they charge me sales tax both on the merchandise and the shipping. I don't think the post office charges sales tax on shipping, but eBay does. And it's usually a lot more than our current local sales tax. It's usually 11, 12%. Excuse me for venting. Anyway, the comment that was in the front page of your development code update says, for me, clarify the license and permit allowed uses for museum. My original request was, I'm zone NC2. It used to be you could have actually, when I bought the place, well, before we became a city, there was 118 business types that could be in MUD. Then the city, finally, after all these ups and downs, went NC2. Now, it looks like museums aren't even in NC2. The recommendation that they said was not directly related to 18A update, get a Lakewood endorsement for a state business license, which I already have and have had since '68, and a home occupation permit. So now I got to get another permit on top of the business licenses that I've had in Lakewood since we became a city, and for a museum operated out of a house. Well, you know, for the last 10,000 to 20,000 years, business proprietors have run businesses and lived there. Why? Security. That was the primary thing. So historically, it's not unusual for a proprietor to live in his business. I'll give you a reason why that kind of looks advantageous. A local museum that we all know and like was broken into last Sunday. Last Sunday. Okay, they took all the computer equipment. They took a compressor that I was using to rebuild some of our exhibits. And police came out and investigated. The place that we're in has got a myriad of entry areas. Every door in the museum was unlocked after that happened. We've got recording of a car that had moved into the alley behind it, and a person that was near it and trying the doors. But anyway, the whole place was ransacked, upstairs, downstairs, as well as the whole museum. That's why concerned people with lots of money invested in their businesses like to live there, like their security. Granted, we can spend $20,000, $30,000 on video systems and all of that, but that's an after-the-fact thing. It doesn't prevent something from happening. So I'd like to see a place for my business. Maybe I'm going to have to move to another city that wants a museum. So that can be done also, but I tried to go put my antique shop and some museum in the Colonial Center in a space that had 1,000 square feet, 1,050 square feet. You know what the cost was for that? Now that we have the plaza open, $50 a square foot. I understand it was offered to somebody else here in Lakewood that wanted a tasting facility there, and the going rate was like $20 a square foot. So those are my experiences with trying to have a business elsewhere, or have it where you can guard your stuff. Because I've got ancient things, one-of-a-kind things, never ever be replaced. So that's my dilemma. What can you do to get me in the right zoning without going back to residential, which I didn't like, or duplex, triplex, or multifamily, or whatever. I'm totally surrounded, except on one side, by a park, NC2 drive-in, Across the street is all NC2 zone antique businesses and whatever, probably even a vape shop, although I don't think they'll be around much longer. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spieth. So, Mr. Guerrero, since we have no other comments for the public hearing, I guess you can join us again. So going to unfinished business, Ms. Spear, on the action on proposed rezone of 5 parcels?
Madam Chair, could you close public comment to begin with?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
We'll close public comment with no comments tonight, and it'll be closed as of this meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so tonight, on the first item under unfinished business for the Planning Commission is taking action on the proposed rezone of 5 parcels at the location of the former Fort Steilacoom Golf Course. And we've had this as a study session and then a public hearing, so you've had it in front of you several times. I'll just bring your attention to, at your positions up there, you've got a hard copy of the proposed resolution, just because there was a few changes that we needed to make to what was provided to you electronically, but it is essentially the same document. But starting on page 6 of your packet this evening, you'll see a memo regarding this issue. Excuse me. And so, as mentioned before, this does affect 5 parcels that are right now zoned Open Space and Recreation 2, and the recommendation is to rezone them to Open Space and Recreation 1, so there's no change for the land use designation, it's simply the zone itself. A vicinity map just showing you where this is. It's just above Fort Steilacoom Park and Western State Hospital, and again, it's where the Fort Steilacoom Golf Course used to be located. A little closer in, you'll see it's a light green on the current zoning map. Over on the right-hand side, you'll see an arrow pointing to the 2 different colors for Open Space Recreation 2 and 1. And so, should this move forward by council action, the parcels in question would then be zoned the same as Fort Steilacoom Park, just below the Western State Hospital campus. A couple of other maps that relate to both the streets and then also the aerial photo showing the 5 parcels and their proximity to the residential neighborhood immediately to the north, and then Western State Hospital, you'll see just a bit of their parking lot in the bottom map on the bottom right corner. So we've talked about this again before, but the OSR 1 is a more passive zone than OSR 2. There's several things that are allowed either administratively or conditionally in OSR 2 that are not allowed at all in OSR 1, such as community and cultural services, amusement and recreation, funeral services, and lodging. And then there's more information in the packet itself regarding the various specific uses that are allowed. If you look on page 9, you'll see a table that summarizes the differences between the 2. And that's pretty much what the content is on this screen here in the PowerPoint. So since you did have a public hearing on September 18th, no public comment was provided to you. So we're at this point ready for you to take consideration of the resolution. And again, you have a hard copy of that corrected version in front of you. And potentially take action this evening on this resolution and forward it to council.
Thank you.
And the motion for consideration, if you want to take it tonight, is there on the screen.
So do I have a motion from the planning commissioners on the action on recommendation to city council? Mr. Guerrero?
I'd move to approve the proposed resolution number 2019-04, recommending the rezone of 5 parcels from Open Space and Recreation 2, OSR 2, to Open Space and Recreation 1, OSR 1.
Thank you. And do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Do we have any further discussion? Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion to approve proposed resolution number 2019-04, recommending the rezone of 5 parcels from Open Space and Recreation 2, OSR OSR 2 to Open Space and Recreation 1, OSR 1. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you so much. Ms. Spear?
Thank you once more, Madam Chair. So the last item on the agenda tonight is going to be pretty brief, simply because we're kind of in a holding pattern with 18A for a moment. But provided to you tonight in your staff report, which begins on page 16 of your packet, is the responses that the staff has been able to prepare to date for 18A comments, which were submitted by Mr. Spieth that he just spoke to in the public comment portion of tonight. Comments from Tim Purrier from the Lakewood Industrial Business Park. And then there was additional comments received after those two from Dave Kruger, who is with WIG Properties. But we have for you for October 16th additional responses that are still pending for Mr. Guerrero's, some of his comments that he's submitted, from additional comments from Mr. Kruger. And then we just received this evening some comments from Commissioner Weber that we'll also be preparing a response to. So we can either walk through this tonight, or I can simply refer you to it and know that that's there, and then you'll also by next Friday get one more packet to look at by the 16th. So it's your pleasure. We can walk through this tonight or just refer it to you to read before the 16th.
Planning Commissioners, would you rather wait to get all the information, or do you want to have a discussion tonight? Mr. Guerrero?
I don't know that I want to go item by item, but I did have a question on a couple of the items.
Okay.
New to me.
Excuse me, yes.
So on page 19 of our packet, the first item, just the language there, it says this code allows for multiple horizontal and or vertically attached dwelling units. Horizontal mixed use means single use buildings allowed on one parcel. Didn't understand what that meant.
I think the attempt there is to explain the difference between within a single structure, vertically stacked, multiple uses versus multiple buildings on a single parcel with various uses that are perhaps single story, and maybe that's the word that's missing.
So you can have a horizontal mixed-use building that just has different uses in it, and it's still a mixed-use building.
Correct,
Okay.
correct, yes. And if we need to tweak that language, I'm wondering if just adding the word parcel after the word single, or I'm sorry, single story would make sense.
I
We
think
can
so.
okay,
Yeah, the language.
we can certainly do that.
Okay. Then item, so on page 21 of our packet, the secondhand dealer, I was unclear a little bit, the difference between a secondhand dealer and a secondhand store, and what we're trying to accomplish there. But then, and then secondly, I was unclear why a secondhand dealer has a reference to an automated kiosk, if there's some example of what that actually means and why we would kind of identify it.
I cannot answer your second question. I can't imagine what this is even referring to. And this may have been picked up from another jurisdiction's definition,
Okay.
but we can verify that. And then you said you were unsure about the difference between a secondhand store and a secondhand dealer?
Right, unless it's just that a dealer refers to a person and a store refers to a physical location.
Yes.
So is the proprietor of a secondhand store a secondhand dealer?
Well, what you've got under the secondhand store is an amendment that says on the bottom of 20 and over to 21, does not include pawnbroker or secondhand dealer. So I would have to get into the specific business lists in the secondhand store versus the secondhand dealer to see what the specific differences are. I think it's what you're selling is maybe a little bit different.
Okay. Maybe I need to read that again. It seemed like they kind of overlap, but we're trying to give
yeah.
different definitions, and so.
Yeah, yeah.
Let me table that one.
Okay, thank you.
And one last item, and I'm not sure where it refers to, but in the discussion about lighting, Mr. Purrier came in and talked about the issue with the industrial park, they really need to get the lights up a little higher.
Right.
I think the way this responded to it was to say, well, you can apply for alternate means and methods. I guess I'd ask if there's a possibility of going back to the lighting designer that helped write that and see if we can get it codified. And my reason for that is just in a cost standpoint, if it's something that the city can do at a relatively small cost versus having the public do it every time at a relatively large cost, I'd prefer that we have the city do that. So.
And we can certainly do that. I've got the contact information of the consultants who put this code together and talk to them about it. Yes.
Great, thank you. That was it.
So, Ms. Spear, based on those questions, before we get the final information at our next meeting, would those be answered at that time?
Yes, we'll include it in the next packet,
All
absolutely.
right, thank you.
Yep.
Any other comments from the commissioners?
All right, if not, then what you see is what you'll have on October 16th are the remainder of the staff responses. You will also get one more big packet of the full draft changes to Titles 3, 12, and 17 that are related to the big 18A changes, the updated full 18A, and then there's also going to be the need to just update cross-references to the new 18A sections in those other codes that are listed. So all of that will be provided to you by next Friday. And that's it.
Okay, may I also ask, are the comments from Mr. Spieth going to be addressed at that time?
Yes, I can answer some of them right
Okay.
now. First of all, I'll refer his questions back to the current planning staff, who are the ones that helped answer this question. But the way the city's business licensing process has changed over the last year or so is the city no longer does its own full business licensing. That's been referred over to the state. And so now the process is a business owner or someone with one of these business licenses has to get what's called an endorsement by the city for state licenses. And if that's not something Mr. Spieth's done in the past, we'll just have to make sure that the process is clear, and I'll have staff work with him on that. And then in terms of whether it's a museum or the business that's not necessarily located at his home address, we'll verify that and make sure it's all clear.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I see we have no new business, but has anything been added that we need to do for new business?
No.
Okay. So report from Council Liaison. Welcome, Mr. Brandstetter.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I would only report that the council held a retreat this past weekend on Saturday, and the two topics at the retreat, we were looking at our legislative agenda for 2020 in preparation for having a joint meeting with our state legislators, but we discussed the agendas for the state, federally, and Pierce County. That there were not a lot of land use items on the state agenda. However, in the federal agenda, there continues to be emphasis on continued federal support for actions relating to the North Clear Zone. In a related matter, the council had earlier at a special meeting approved the city entering into a contract with the Department of Defense that provided an initial $5 million to make assist with the purchase of the property currently occupied by Tactical Taylor, and up to an additional $75 million over 20 years towards the purchase of the rest of the properties in the clear zone. That's a combination of money that came from the Army and money that came from the Air Force. So that sort of removes a significant logjam that's there. There's perhaps some requirement to raise some additional matching dollars that are required by the agreement from the state, but the state has implemented in this past session a funding process that are specifically designed to look to be able to do that. And then we're anticipating being able to buy those properties and pass them on to the Department of Defense in a manner that recoups the city funds that are been spent on those properties when ownership is transferred to the Department of Defense. So that's good. The second item that we really looked at on our retreat is that we looked out 6 years at transportation projects, and we particularly looked at the next series of roads that we hope to work on between now and 2024. We really didn't add any significant new projects to that list. We just sort of refreshed our thoughts about the sequence of them and which ones we had locked in funding for and which ones we'll be working on funding for. The significant locked-in funding projects included the Veterans Drive, which is we're looking to construct in 2020. That the improvements along Onyx in Oak Brook, from Oak Brook Park all the way to Phillips, which we have funding for through city bond revenues, being able to go and do that. The next phase of Gravelly Lake Drive from Washington Boulevard in the opposite direction from where the first phase started, going to the other end of Nyanza, to be able to go and do that. And, we see that as something that is funded. And then we discussed the likelihood of funding for a number of other projects, to include the various segments of Stellicum Boulevard, some of which we have funding for and some of which we still need to get funding in one way or another for, but that we're optimistic for. And then the Washington Boulevard, Edgewood, North Fort Road, which we sort of were briefed on all of the favorable indications that a federal program that is very well suited to that project is going to be funded by the U.S. Congress in this current session that they have in the next defense budget. And so all in all, it was a pretty positive discussion in that everything, even if it wasn't funded, there seemed to be options to get the funding for them, and that will come very close to completing over the past 20 years, an upgrade of the arterial system in the city by 2024. The other thing we looked at is that we want to return our attention to the non-motorized transportation plan, and most specifically to sidewalks. And we looked at what a program of both completing the sidewalks along arterials and then a whole series of connectivity sidewalks, which were sidewalks that are not on primary arterials, but that actually go from one place to another where there are sidewalks and where we have gaps. Some 30 projects on that map to do that, which would be, if completed, would get us to where 20% of the sidewalk miles of the city would be covered, and sidewalk miles are sometimes twice what street miles are, because if you put them on both sides of the street, being able to go and do that. But essentially, one of the goals was to make sure that key things that we were looking for, that we would have sidewalks that move together, that the sidewalk network would have gaps that lead from neighborhoods in both the east, west, and north and south portions of the city into the town center without gaps, and that all of the bus routes would have sidewalks along them, as pedestrians and particularly folks with disabilities need to move in one direction along a street to be able to get to a bus stop. Okay, so that those were done, and then a couple of things that have been poster childs for people who wanted to complain about things not being half done, like Hipkins Road, and doing that, and being able to go and do that. But we had that discussion without a discussion of cost, and so we sort of put some things on, took some things off, and then I've asked the city manager to bring us a cost estimate along with some options about how much of that can we fund and construct by 2024. And I think that there's a 2020 intent on the part of the council to get back into our non-motorized transportation plan, to both fill it out as to what we're going to build, and then move aggressively to begin building that. On the Pierce County legislative agenda, that to the extent that we had some land use issues, our agenda is to ask the county to support our positions with respect to the Puget Sound Regional Council's efforts to expand their authority at the expense of local authority in a variety of new areas in the Vision 2050 document. So we're at least looking to document that in our agenda to the county council, seeking their support for that. That is I believe that, the Vision 2050 finalization is scheduled for next year in 2020, and so we're hoping that it's not locked in the way it's drafted, but we're not sure exactly how much change we'll get. It's just that we're not looking to accept change quietly. But if there are any other questions about what the council is up to, I'd be glad to answer them.
Any questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Brandstetter. Councilman. So, any reports from the commissioners? Sorry. Mr. Weber? Okay.
I don't have anything on this.
Okay, anybody else have anything? Okay, any further comments from the city?
Just to say that next time, so 2 weeks from tonight, it's scheduled action on the 2020 Comprehensive Plan Amendment docket, and then that final review and discussion, and if you're ready, action on 18A. If not, it can be moved into November, but the idea at this point is to be taking action on the 16th.
Thank you. And so, meeting's adjourned.